The worst day of my life began under a bright summer sky, not in a storm. The sun was shining, children were laughing in the park across the street, and people hurried to work without realizing that my entire world was about to change forever. I was standing outside the family courthouse holding my 6-year-old son Rowan's tiny hand while staring at an envelope that could either save us or destroy us. Inside was an offer so unbelievable that it felt cruel. A billionaire CEO wanted to marry me for exactly 1 year. It wouldn't be a love story. It would be a contract. I thought the hardest part would be pretending to be her husband. I had no idea the hardest part would come 12 months later, when her lonely little daughter wrapped her arms around my waist with tears running down her face and silently begged me not to leave. Before we begin this unforgettable story, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment telling us if you believe kindness can change a person's destiny, share this story with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to Between Hearts for more emotional stories that remind us love often appears when we least expect it. Life had taught me that surviving and living were two different things. Since losing my wife 3 years earlier to a sudden illness, surviving was all I knew. Every morning started before sunrise as I prepared breakfast, packed lunches, cleaned our tiny rented apartment, and rushed Rowan to school before working long hours repairing furniture in a neighborhood workshop. The business barely paid enough for rent and groceries, but every evening I came home pretending everything was fine because my son deserved smiles instead of worry. Children notice more than adults realize. Rowan often left half of his dinner untouched, claiming he wasn't hungry, though I knew he was simply trying to make our food last longer. Those quiet sacrifices from such a young boy broke my heart more than any unpaid bill. Everything changed on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon when I was hired to restore an antique wooden desk in one of the tallest office buildings in the city. The owner was Mara Voss, one of the youngest billionaire CEOs in the country. Newspapers described her as brilliant, fearless, and impossible to impress. The business magazines admired her success while gossip columns called her cold and unreachable. None of those descriptions prepared me for the woman sitting behind the enormous glass desk. She looked exhausted rather than powerful. Her expensive clothes couldn't hide the sadness in her eyes, and the silence inside her office felt heavier than the luxury surrounding us. As I carefully repaired the damaged desk, I noticed a child's drawing lying beneath several business reports. It showed a little girl holding her mother's hand, but the mother's face had been erased over and over until only the paper remained. I quietly placed the drawing back where I found it, pretending not to notice. Mara watched everything without saying a word. Before I left, she thanked me for treating the drawing with respect instead of curiosity. That simple moment became the beginning of something neither of us expected. A week later her assistant called with another furniture restoration job. Then another. Eventually Mara asked if I could restore several antique pieces inside her mansion. The house was breathtaking during the daytime, filled with sunlight pouring through enormous windows, polished marble floors, and beautiful gardens blooming with roses. Yet despite all its beauty, it felt strangely empty. Wealth had built the walls, but loneliness lived inside them. That was where I first met her 8-year-old daughter, Celeste. She quietly sat near the staircase reading a book far too advanced for her age. She barely looked up as I worked, but every afternoon she returned to the same spot. Gradually she began asking questions about woodworking, tools, and how broken things could become beautiful again. Unlike most children fascinated by expensive toys, Celeste seemed fascinated by patience. She watched me sand rough edges until smooth, explaining that scars in wood were not flaws but proof that something had survived. One afternoon Rowan had no school because of a teacher conference, so I brought him along after receiving permission. Within an hour the two children were running through the gardens laughing louder than anyone had in that mansion for years. Watching them play, Mara smiled in a way that looked unfamiliar, as if happiness had become something she rarely practiced. Days later Mara asked me to stay after finishing work. She spoke honestly, without pride or hesitation. A major corporate merger depended on presenting the image of a stable family. Investors believed leadership required reliability, and recent rumors about her personal life threatened billions of dollars in business. She needed a husband for 1 year. In return, every debt I carried would disappear, Rowan's education would be guaranteed, and enough money would secure our future forever. I refused immediately. Marriage wasn't a business arrangement to me. It had once been the greatest promise of my life. But that night I returned home to find another eviction notice taped to our apartment door. Rowan quietly asked whether we would have to move again. His voice held no complaint, only fear. That single question echoed through my mind until morning. 2 weeks later I signed the contract. The wedding happened quietly in a private garden beneath clear blue skies. Cameras captured smiling photographs while newspapers celebrated the unexpected marriage between a billionaire executive and an ordinary widowed craftsman. The world assumed it was a fairy tale. Only 3 people knew it was simply an agreement. At first everything felt painfully awkward. I moved into the mansion with Rowan, trying not to disturb anyone. Separate bedrooms. Separate lives. Separate futures. We acted like strangers performing roles inside an expensive movie. Yet families rarely grow through grand speeches. They grow through ordinary mornings. I started making breakfast because the kitchen staff only prepared formal meals. Soon Celeste began joining Rowan and me before school. Pancakes replaced silence. Laughter slowly replaced awkwardness. Even Mara occasionally appeared, coffee in hand, pretending she wasn't interested while secretly listening to our conversations. The mansion transformed during the daytime. Gardens filled with children's games instead of quiet footsteps. The dining room echoed with homework discussions instead of business meetings. Birthdays were celebrated. Weekend picnics became traditions. The house finally sounded like a home. Still, invisible walls remained between Mara and me. Late one afternoon I found her sitting alone on a garden bench staring at old photographs. She admitted that after Celeste's father abandoned them years earlier, she promised herself never to trust anyone again. Building a company felt easier than rebuilding a broken heart. Success became armor. Money became protection. But neither could comfort a lonely child. For the first time, I realized she wasn't emotionally distant because she lacked kindness. She was distant because she feared losing people. Months passed. I repaired more than furniture inside that house. I repaired broken fences in the garden, squeaky doors, old bookshelves, forgotten memories, and somehow, without realizing it, parts of every heart living there. Rowan finally laughed like a child again instead of worrying like an adult. Celeste smiled without forcing it. Mara began leaving work earlier just to eat dinner with us. The contract quietly faded into the background. Then life reminded us that happiness is fragile. A ruthless board member uncovered our agreement and threatened to expose everything publicly unless Mara surrendered control of her company. Headlines exploded across every news outlet. Reporters surrounded the mansion. Investors panicked. Friends disappeared. People who once praised Mara suddenly questioned every achievement she had ever earned. She prepared to resign. She believed sacrificing everything would protect the children from public humiliation. I couldn't let that happen. During an emergency shareholder meeting, I stood before hundreds of strangers and admitted the truth. Yes, our marriage had started with a contract. Yes, money had brought us together. But contracts cannot explain bedtime stories, scraped knees, school concerts, family breakfasts, or children who finally learned how to smile again. I explained that real families aren't defined by how they begin but by how they choose each other every single day. The room fell completely silent. For the first time, people stopped seeing a billionaire and started seeing a mother. The attempted takeover collapsed. Mara remained CEO. Yet the calendar kept moving. 1 year eventually came to an end. According to the agreement, I quietly packed my belongings before sunrise while everyone else slept. I believed leaving would free Mara from gossip forever. I believed I was doing the honorable thing. As I carried the final box toward the front door, I heard soft footsteps behind me. Celeste stood there wearing her school sweater, clutching the small wooden birdhouse we had built together months earlier. Without saying anything at first, she wrapped both arms around me as tightly as she could. Tears soaked through my shirt while her tiny hands refused to let go. Every fear she had ever hidden finally reached the surface. She had already lost one father. She couldn't survive losing another. At that exact moment Rowan walked downstairs carrying his backpack. Instead of asking why we were leaving, he quietly stood beside Celeste and held her hand. Then Mara appeared. She looked at the packed boxes. She looked at the children. Finally she looked at me with tears she no longer tried to hide. She admitted that somewhere between ordinary breakfasts, school projects, quiet evenings, and countless small acts of kindness, the contract had stopped meaning anything. She hadn't fallen in love because I rescued her. She had fallen in love because I never treated her wealth as something more valuable than her heart. I had loved her daughter as my own without expecting anything in return. I had given their mansion something money could never buy, a family. I slowly carried every box back inside. Not because the contract demanded it. Because love invited it. The following spring we held another wedding. This time there were no investors, no lawyers, and no cameras chasing headlines. Only close friends, children laughing beneath warm sunshine, blooming flowers, and promises that came freely instead of being signed on paper. Years later my woodworking business expanded into a company that trained struggling single parents in skilled craftsmanship, giving them stable careers and hope. Mara proudly supported the program without ever taking credit for it. Rowan and Celeste grew into compassionate young adults who reminded everyone that family is built through love, not blood alone. Sometimes visitors asked whether marrying a billionaire had changed my life. I always answered the same way. No. Choosing kindness when life felt unfair changed my life. The billionaire simply happened to be waiting at the end of that road. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, leave a comment sharing the moment that moved you the most, share it with someone who believes hope still exists, and subscribe to Between Hearts so together we can continue spreading stories that remind the world compassion is never wasted. Special request, comment below with "Family is built by love, not by blood" if you believe even broken hearts deserve a second chance. Some people spend their entire lives searching for wealth, while others search for love. The truly fortunate discover that kindness has a mysterious way of leading them to both. And sometimes, under the brightest daytime sky, the family you never expected becomes the one you were always meant to have.